If someone told you they had died and returned, said they saw a radiant light, reunited with loved ones who had passed, and heard messages from a realm beyond human understanding, would you believe them? What if the person telling the story wasn't just anyone, but a doctor, a scientist, or a university professor who had spent 30 years studying near-death experiences? Would that change how you see death? Could it be that death isn't a period at the end of a sentence, but an ellipsis marking the beginning of something deeper, more real, something our rational world has always dismissed? My name is Elizabeth Ray Donovan. I'm a professor, a psychologist, a woman who has spent over half her life exploring what lies on the edge between life and death. But let me tell you the truth, there was a time I didn't believe a word of what I studied. I began as a skeptic, armed with logic, data, charts, and peer-reviewed journals. I thought I would debunk these so-called mystical stories, that I would prove they were nothing more than chemical reactions in a brain shutting down. I believed I was helping people stay grounded. I was wrong, and it took me 30 years to realize some things are not meant to be understood by the mind, but felt by the soul. My journey began with a loss. When I was 26, my mother died from a sudden stroke. She was the person I loved most in the world, the one who had taught me warmth during a childhood shaped by doubt. Her death was abrupt. No goodbye, no final moment. I fell into a silence I couldn't explain, a sense of absence I couldn't fix. I asked myself, is there anything after this? Is my mother still out there somewhere? And if not, did that mean all those moments of love, all those memories just disappeared forever? I told myself I wasn't fragile enough to need a comforting illusion. So I returned to the university, buried myself in research, and set out to find the truth. That's when I first came across the term near-death experience. Strange, vivid accounts from people who had been clinically dead and revived, who claimed they left their bodies, encountered a loving presence, and watched their lives unfold before them like a movie in slow motion. I laughed. I dismissed them as hallucinations, psychological coping mechanisms, stories soaked in religious symbolism. But quietly, deep inside me, a small, fragile voice whispered, "But what if it's true?" I began collecting case files. The first interviews were designed purely to find flaws, to gather evidence, to disprove the claims. I asked detailed questions, cross-checked timelines, and searched for logical gaps. But something strange happened. The more I listened, the more I noticed an unsettling pattern. These stories, told by people from different cultures, different ages, who had never met one another, shared astonishing similarities. The sensation of leaving their bodies, a radiant light, reunions with loved ones who had passed, a voice that spoke without words yet was completely understood, and above all a love so overwhelming they had never felt anything like it on earth. I wanted to refute it all, to explain it away as hallucinations brought on by oxygen deprivation, abnormal brain activity, or psychological trauma. But there was something in their eyes, something so deeply sincere it gave me chills. Some wept as they spoke. Others admitted they hadn't told a soul in over 10 years, afraid of being labeled insane. Several told me the experience completely changed the way they lived. They no longer feared death. They let go of resentment. They began living with kindness, humility, and love. That's when I realized I wasn't doubting them anymore. I was doubting myself. And I knew then, this was no longer just a research project. It was a calling, a quiet pull from deep within me, the same pull I had ignored since the day my mother left this world. I didn't know exactly where this path would take me, but I did know that if I turned away now, I would spend the rest of my life buried in numbers, never knowing what it meant to truly love. I had prepared everything to debunk it. Neurological theories, medical reports, MRI scans, behavioral psychology research. I entered this investigation like a prosecutor stepping into a courtroom. I wasn't searching for the truth. I was searching for a way to prove everyone else wrong. But then came the witnesses. One by one, their stories unfolded, and little by little, the smallest details began piercing through the armor of skepticism I had worn my entire life. The first case that truly shook me was a man named Daniel, 52 years old, who went into cardiac arrest after a car accident. When he regained consciousness, he claimed to have watched the entire emergency response team from a corner of the ceiling. He described the exact movements of the doctors, the color of their gloves, and the specific medical device placed on his chest. What terrified me was that everything he said matched the footage from the ER camera. There was no way he could have seen any of it while unconscious. And he somehow knew that the nurse on duty wore purple scrubs instead of white, something even I hadn't noticed until I reviewed the recording. I asked him, How do you know it wasn't just your imagination? He looked at me, not angry, not defensive. Just calm. And he said, you can't imagine what it's like to see your own body lying motionless while your soul is still awake, still watching, still loving. Another case was Caroline, a young woman who flatlined due to hemorrhaging after childbirth. She was clinically dead for nearly 10 minutes. When she came back, she spoke of being taken to a place filled with light, not blinding but soft, like a mother's embrace. There, she said, she met her first child, the one she lost to stillbirth at 19-something. Even her husband didn't know. The child didn't speak. He just smiled, reached up to touch her cheek, and then faded into the light. She said she didn't want to return, but a voice not heard, but felt inside her, spoke gently. The child who lives needs you now. Go back and love without fear. She woke up exhausted, but at peace. And from that moment on, she said every day felt like a gift she could no longer afford to waste. I sat through these stories, jotting down notes, analyzing and cross-referencing details. But slowly, something in me no longer wanted to analyze. I began listening with a different part of myself, a part one had buried beneath layers of academic armor. The part that still knew how to feel. The part that still knew how to believe. Then came the realization that startled me more than anything else. The people who had near-death experiences all changed after returning. But not in the way I expected, not in some mystical, delusional, or irrational sense. They became softer. Kinda. Less judgmental. More understanding. Many let go of their formal religions, yet lived more spiritually than ever before. They no longer believed in a punishing God above, but spoke of a vast, loving presence that lived within everyone. And perhaps the most astonishing part, they were no longer afraid to die. Or more accurately, they were no longer afraid to live. They were no longer afraid of being misunderstood, of expressing love, of living in a way that was true to who they were. They came back to this world as if they had received a divine message that whispered, "Live truthfully. That's why you were sent here." I couldn't explain it with formulas. I couldn't reduce it to a diagnosis. I could only observe these people who had stepped one foot into death and returned like newborns, seeing the world again for the first time. I remember one man saying to me, "Professor, I don't need you to believe me. I just need you to listen. Because if you listen with your whole heart, you'll know I'm not lying. I have nothing to gain by sharing this except one thing, the hope that you'll pass it on to someone who needs to hear it." I sat still. I asked no more questions. And for the first time in all my years of research, I stopped trying to understand. I let myself be touched. Now let me tell you about the moment that changed everything for me, a case so profound that even I, a woman of logic and data, found myself in tears. It was the day I realized I was no longer just studying near-death experiences. I had become a part of one. I had collected hundreds of case files, recordings, transcripts, and cross-referenced details. I thought I'd heard enough to be immune to emotion. I believed that after all this time, I could distinguish imagination from truth. But I was wrong. Some things can't be sorted through degrees or experience. Because there was one encounter that shattered every wall I had built, a moment so raw that I no longer wanted to analyze, only sit in silence and feel. Her name was Sylvia. She was in her early 60s when she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage while meditating. She was clinically dead for 13 minutes. When she came back, she was completely different. No more rage. No more fear. No more isolation inside her gloomy room. And what struck me most, she had never read a book on NDEs. Had never even heard the term, out-of-body experience. To her, it was just a deep dream. But when I asked about it, her eyes welled up. "I don't know why I was shown those things," she whispered. "But I know I died. And I was chosen to return." I asked, "What did you see?" She paused for a long time, then spoke softly, almost to herself. "I saw myself in a white space. No light. No darkness. Just presence. Just life. Just love. I didn't see or hear, but I knew. I belonged there. Then I was shown my life. Every word I said caused pain. Every judgmental glance. Every time I chose silence over love. But I wasn't scolded. I just felt sorrow for myself. I could barely breathe as she spoke. I asked, "What made you come back?" She smiled gently. "I was asked one question. If you knew love was everything, would you dare to live that way?" And I returned. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I broke down. Not from grief, but from the unbearable truth of it all. That moment tore through me. No more screens. No more distance between the researcher and the subject. Only one soul who had died, handing a mysterious kind of life to another soul who hadn't realized she had been dead inside for far too long. After that day, I stopped doing research for a few weeks. I went on morning walks. I sat beneath the oak tree in the park near my house and simply stayed still. I began listening to the old recordings again, not with a mind trying to spot contradictions, but with a reverent heart. And the more I listened, the more I understood. None of them were trying to convince me. They didn't need me to believe. They only needed to believe in themselves. Then something strange happened to me. One night, I dreamed of my mother. But it wasn't like the vague, fuzzy dreams the brain often produces. This time, she was sitting beside me, holding my hand, saying nothing. I broke down crying in the dream, sobbing like a child. I said, "I've been looking for you for 30 years. And she replied, "I never left. You just never stayed long enough to feel I was still here." I woke up in tears, but for the first time in 3 decades, I felt peace. I know no one can prove that the dream was real. No one can verify that my mother truly visited me. But what I know for sure is that from that moment on, I no longer needed evidence. I no longer needed the next survey to believe that something sacred is woven through this world. I began to understand. Science is a tool, not a boundary. The mind is the boat, but emotion is the wind. And if we steer without letting the wind guide us, we'll never reach the far shore. Since that day, I have no longer been a researcher of near-death experiences. I became part of their awakening. I became a listener, a storyteller, a bridge between souls who had touched truth and those still wrestling with doubt, wounds, and unnamed fears. I no longer research to find answers. I write, I share, I speak not to prove, but to connect. Because I now understand that behind every near-death experience is a soul that has crossed the final threshold and returned with a gift far greater than any degree, the gift of awakened consciousness. I began appearing at small gatherings, not places focused on biology or brain chemistry, but on love, light, and the kind of knowing that defies language yet fills every heart that's truly listening. I stood before hundreds of people who had come close to death, who had flatlined on hospital monitors, who had been pulled back from the edge of the void. And I realized I was no longer the professor, no longer the researcher. I was the student again, learning from the beginning how to truly listen to the human soul. I remember the first time I hosted a private sharing circle for people who had experienced NDEs. We sat in a quiet room under warm lights, no slides, no recordings, no whiteboards. Just presence. A middle-aged man named Mark began to speak. I was a Marine. I was trained to believe in nothing but weapons and orders. But the day I was shot through the lung, I saw my father, who had died when I was 10. He didn't say anything, just looked at me and placed his hand on my chest. When I woke up, the bleeding had stopped. I don't need anyone to believe me. I just know I had never forgiven my father until the moment he forgave me. The room fell into stillness. Then another person spoke, and then another. One by one, strangers became a community not through religion, not through doctrine, but through love that reached beyond death. I carried these stories wherever I went, from scientific conferences to TEDx talks, from university classrooms to online webinars. At first, people still hesitated, but then they listened. And I believe, if even one part of their heart stirred, then a door had opened. A seed had been planted. I wrote a book. Not a book to teach others how to live, but one that records the footprints of those who crossed into death and came back so that we don't have to wait until our final moments to realize what we've missed. I've received thousands of letters, emails, and handwritten notes from people who once lived in fear, who had considered ending their lives, who had lost faith in everything until they heard just one near-death story. And they wrote, "I cried, but for the first time not from pain, but because I finally felt hope." That's when I understood, not everyone has to die to wake up. Sometimes all it takes is hearing the right story at the right time, and your heart begins to remember. It remembers that you are not just skin and memories. You are awareness. You are love, temporarily living inside a human body. And when you forget that, life will send you a disruption, a moment near death, not to punish you, but to awaken you, to bring you back home. Someone once asked me, "Professor, after 30 years, are you certain these experiences are real?" I smiled, because now I know, there are truths you don't need to be certain of to live by. Some things don't need to be proven to be real. And some truths only reveal themselves when you dare to step beyond the limits of fear. So let me leave you with the most profound lesson I've learned after 30 years and thousands of near-death stories. A lesson that can change the way you live, the way you love, and the way you view death. It is not dying that ends life. It is forgetting how to live that begins death long before the body ever stops. I used to believe that knowledge was the destination. That if we gathered enough data, the right tools, and enough time, we would arrive at the truth. But after 30 years of standing at the edge between life and death, after thousands of whispered stories from those who had died and come back, I've realized this. Truth isn't waiting at the end of the search. It's found in the way we walk every step of the journey. Truth doesn't live in a textbook. It lives in the eyes of someone who's just realized they still have love left to give. It's not hidden in probability theory, but in the moment a soul breaks down in tears because they were finally forgiven by their past. The greatest lesson I've learned is this: life doesn't truly begin when the heart starts beating. It begins when the heart opens to pain, opens to loss, opens to the unexplainable. Because the more we try to understand, the further we drift. The more we surrender the need to understand, the closer we come. People who go through near-death experiences often say they were never judged. No one asked what religion they followed or what great things they had accomplished. They were simply shown every time they caused pain and every time they made someone feel loved. There was no scale, no verdict, just a reflection, as if the universe never needed to punish, because the soul already knows where it stands. I look back at myself. For years, I lived like a machine, reasoning, proving, testing, hiding behind the veil of academic neutrality. But when my mother died, when I listened to hundreds of stories about light, about the soul, about a love that transcends the body, I understood. Neutrality is the mask of fear. And the greatest fear is believing in something you can't control. But the moment I dared to believe, I was no longer who I used to be. I wasn't just an observer, I became present. I no longer stood in front of a classroom with chalk and formulas. I sat beside the man who had just lost his wife. I held the woman who once tried to end her life. I reached for the hand of someone who had just come back from a moment of stillness and said, "I believe you, because I've heard 1,000 voices like yours. And they all return with the same truth: love never dies." Many people ask me, after all your research on near-death experiences, are you still afraid of dying? I smile. Not the kind of smile that ends a conversation, but the kind that understands deeply. I'm no longer afraid of death, but I am afraid of living without truth, of living as a role, of living and forgetting who I am. I live differently now. I listen more closely. I hug more often. I don't interrupt anymore. I no longer chase deadlines and forget the sunset. I write handwritten letters. I light candles. I look people in the eyes longer than I used to. And I've learned something that no lecture ever taught me. Sometimes silent eye contact can heal more than 1,000 well-meant words. If you ask me today, can you summarize those 30 years in one sentence? I wouldn't use terminology. I wouldn't talk about clinical stages or post-death phenomena. I would simply say this: you don't have to die to be reborn. You only have to be brave enough to let go of what is no longer you. I used to think death was the final boundary. Now I know fear is the real limit, the fear of losing, of not being enough, of not being loved, of not belonging. But when you enter a space where those fears no longer have power, where the light doesn't ask where you came from, but simply embraces you as you are, you'll understand. You were never abandoned. You just forgot the way home. And if you're still here, if your heart is still beating, if you're still breathing, then you still have a chance. Not to start over, but to remember. To remember that you didn't come here to prove anything. You came here to love, to forgive, to be present, and to come home. Right now, I want to ask you the very question that thousands of people have heard as they stood at the edge of death. If you knew that love is all there is, would you dare to live that way? If you've ever experienced a strange moment, a near-miss accident, a dream that felt more real than waking, a flash of light you couldn't explain, or just the quiet feeling that someone is watching over you from the other side. If you've ever stood on the edge of life and death, even just in your heart, and felt something shift in your soul from that moment on, then tell your story. Share it below, even if it's short, even if it feels unfinished, even if you think, no one will believe me. Because maybe, just maybe, your story will be the light for someone lost in the dark. Because maybe you're not the only one who's seen something miraculous. You're just the first one brave enough to say it out loud. I'm listening, and thousands of others are too. Share your story. Be the bridge you once wished you had.